Recall from our prior videos that Midrash and Mishnah started out as styles of learning among small groups of rabbis in the 1st and 2nd century before becoming crystallized as works of literature that were originally published orally. Around the year 200 CE, Rabbi Judah the Prince published the Mishnah, a work that combined the contributions of various rabbinic study halls and staked a claim to being the definitive statement of religious life. The Mishnah's unequivocal clarity is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. Because the Mishnah asserts everything largely without rhyme or reason, a reader or hearer is left wondering where the author derived some of these ideas. On the other hand, while midrashic works are messily disorganized, they are clearly built upon the authority of the Bible, and one can see the direct connection between a new meaning and the biblical original. Like Midrash and Mishnah, Talmud emerged as yet another style of learning. This style of learning came to produce an oral literature. The propagation of this learning style among rabbinic circles in different locations is how two separate Talmuds came to be produced: the Palestinian Talmud, sometimes called Talmud Yerushalmi, and the Babylonian Talmud, sometimes called Talmud Bavli. As a genre of literature, Talmud is something of a meta-genre that combines the separate disciplines of Midrash and Mishnah. Talmudic passages commonly begin by asking how we know a certain idea presented in the Mishnah. The answer to this question is always a midrash, which connects the Mishnaic idea with a biblical verse as understood rabbinically. The two Talmuds constitute a single genre on the basis of their similarities. Here are the things they have in common. Both Talmuds are structured around the Mishnah. Both contain comments attributed to rabbis who lived both before and after the period of the Mishnah's composition. Both produce something of a multi-generational conversation. Both are marked by intense logic and dialectical analysis, and both are written in a combination of Hebrew and Aramaic. But the two Talmuds also have striking differences, starting with size. The Babylonian Talmud is much longer in terms of total text, and the average smaller unit, the topical sugya or pericope, is also longer. The two Talmuds are written in different dialects of Aramaic. While the Babylonian Talmud records attributed statements from 6 generations of post-Mishnah rabbis, the Palestinian Talmud only attributes statements to 4 generations of post-Mishnah rabbis. Finally, the Palestinian Talmud has much less textual signage and framing to facilitate reading. There are 4 interrelated factors that explain these differences. First, the Palestinian Talmud was redacted after a shorter period in which Talmud was the main style of learning. While the Babylonian Talmud shows signs of strong intellectual activity beyond the 6 generations of attributed rabbis, the Palestinian Talmud seems to have been redacted and closed after 4 generations of rabbis. Second, in addition to the shorter period of gestation, the Palestinian Talmud's redaction was less literarily ambitious than that of the Babylonian Talmud. Where the editors or stamaim of the Babylonian Talmud actively reorganized inherited materials and contributed sizable chunks of anonymous commentary and exposition, the stamaim of the Palestinian Talmud allowed their inherited materials to settle in place without much framing or interpretation. The Babylonian Talmud is the only work of literature definitively produced by the rabbis of Babylonia. In contrast, there are more than 20 works of Midrash and 2 works of Mishnah, in addition to the Palestinian Talmud, that survive from Palestine. Fourth, some of the differences identified in terms of redaction and textual signage are not a function of the original work itself, but of its reception history. After the rabbinic period, the Babylonian Talmud became celebrated and well-studied, while the Palestinian Talmud languished. There are many reasons why this happened, the major one being that the figures who popularized rabbinic literature were living in Babylonia. But the reasons are less important than the fact that the Babylonian Talmud was heavily stylized during its period of oral transmission in the 8th and 9th centuries and would continue to be intentionally and unintentionally stylized to facilitate reading during its period of handwritten manuscript transmission. The Palestinian Talmud did not generate as robust a period of oral transmission, and we can speculate on the basis of the paucity of handwritten manuscripts that it underwent much less stylizing during this stage as well. The subsequent boom in commentary on the Babylonian Talmud and the dearth of commentary on the Palestinian only exacerbated these issues. The first printed edition of the Palestinian Talmud, Venice 1523, drew its text from a 1289 manuscript now housed at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. If you look at the beginning of the first chapter of Makot, you will find all of the chapter's Mishnah text at the beginning, before any of the Talmud commentary on the Mishnah. This was the original manuscript practice for Babylonian Talmud as well, before scribes facilitated learning by chopping up the Mishnah and associating specific sections of Talmud with appropriate Mishnaic sections. The Yerushalmi text opens with a statement attributed to the third-generation rabbi, Rabbi Ba bar Memel. The syntax of the statement marks it as exegetical, and this is a case in which he was killed, but if he was not killed, no. One of the things that makes the Palestinian Talmud so difficult to read is that there is much less editorial help for the reader. Rabbi Ba bar Memel's statement is not introduced and is vague enough to potentially attach to a number of statements in the Mishnah. The anonymous editorial voice, the Stam of the Yerushalmi, attaches it to the Mishnah about recurring sets of witnesses who each come and falsify the testimony of the previous set. The Stam sees Rabbi Ba's statement as a comment on a view of Rabbi Judah that says in the Mishnah about recurring false witnesses that only the first set of witnesses is killed. Rabbi Ba is thus adding something to Rabbi Judah's statement. Since Rabbi Judah thinks that the entire scenario is a conspiracy, it is strange that he licenses even the killing of the first set of witnesses. Rabbi Ba explains Rabbi Yehuda's meaning as referencing a case in which the conspiracy only materialized after the execution of the first set of witnesses. One cannot resurrect these executed witnesses, but one certainly would not kill the first set of witnesses once it became clear that a conspiracy was involved. The text continues with the question of another third-generation Amora, Rabbi Bon bar Chia. Rabbi Bon asks about a case in which the new rabbinic technique for definitively establishing a false witness ends up in a gray area. What if a set of witnesses testifies that so-and-so murdered someone in Lod on the first of the month, and a second set testified that the witnesses were in Caesarea on the 5th of the month, and a third set testified that the second set was in Tzipori on the 10th of the month? Though the testimony takes the proper form for establishing a false witness, the content allows for some wiggle room, as it would be possible, with some difficulty, to have been in both places. Rabbi Bon decides that in this case one cannot kill the defendant because the initial witnesses may be lying, and one cannot kill the witnesses either because they may be speaking the truth. One of the challenges of studying the Palestinian Talmud is that there are often aspects that are difficult to explain. Consider the passage we just read. Why does Rabbi Bon narrate a case in which there are 3 sets of witnesses instead of a case with 2 sets of witnesses? If the point of the hypothetical is to explain that it is unclear whether the defendant is guilty or not, there is no need for the third set of witnesses. Once the second set of witnesses challenges the first set about their location, that should undermine their credibility enough to shed doubt on their testimony. The inclusion of the third set of witnesses might indicate that the hypothetical was offered as commentary on the Mishnah regarding the conspiracy of multiple lying witnesses. If that is the case, then it could be commenting on either the majority view, that all of the conspiring witnesses can be killed, or the view of Rabbi Judah, that only the first set is killed. I would argue that it is more likely that it is commenting on Rabbi Judah, and that it understands Rabbi Judah differently than Rabbi Ba bar Memel. Rabbi Ba bar Memel had assumed that Rabbi Judah would not kill even the first set of witnesses in a conspiracy case. Rabbi Bon disagrees and understands Rabbi Judah as punishing the first set of witnesses uniquely in cases of conspiracy, as if the conspiracy is itself strong evidence that the first set of witnesses are liars. The hypothetical is designed to tweak Rabbi Judah's position in cases in which the conspiracy is uncertain. The constructed scenario is designed to show that the arrival in court of multiple alternating witnesses is not, in and of itself, proof of a conspiracy, and the guilt of the first set of witnesses. In such a case, even Rabbi Judah will not execute the first set of witnesses. Notice how much work I had to do to explain a few words in the Palestinian Talmud, and how, even after I'm done, I cannot be 100% confident in my reading. This is a typical experience for readers of the Palestinian Talmud. In the next video, we will see how the prominent Babylonian Rabbi Rava handles a case similar to that of Rabbi Bon.